Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Executive Hub webinar series. My name is Amanda Rogers, and I am the host of the velocityHUB Executive Hub webinar, where we have interactive conversations with executives about strategic and high-level business concepts, as well as the tactical day-to-day actions for getting stuff done and driving organizations of all types. Our goal is to help you see into the minds of some impressive strategic thinkers, executive leaders, and successful business owners so that you can learn from their mistakes and emulate their successes. So here's our agenda for the webinar today. I'll introduce Brendan, and then he and I will talk about strategic thinking, strategic planning, and achieving goals. So our goals for this webinar are for you to learn key strategies and actions to think more strategically, developing a strategic plan for your business, and overcome challenges and courageously pursue your own goals. So on the webinar today, you can participate by commenting or asking questions. We will have team members watching the comments and questions the whole time, so feel free to chime in at any time if you have something to say, and we will make sure that we bring it into the conversation. So for this month, I'm excited to have our managing partner and a mentor of mine, Brendan Keegan, on the webinar. Brendan started velocityHUB just about 6 years ago after an impressive corporate and turnaround career. Some impressive facts and figures about Brendan are that he is a 4-time president and CEO of private equity-backed companies ranging from 5,000 to 10,000 employees. By age 29, Brendan was named Chief Sales Officer of the technology giant EDS, which was number 86 on the Fortune 100. He's raised $1 billion of capital and, most importantly, returned $2.2 billion to investors. He's acquired, divested, and sold over 30 companies, led over 25,000 people in 150 countries, served on over 50 boards, and published 200 plus different articles, and received his bachelor's from Rensselaer, MBA from George Washington, executive certification from the University of Chicago, and was recently named a distinguished fellow by Dartmouth College. And Brendan's background is relevant today because in each of his president and CEO roles, he was required to think strategically and do strategic and financial turnarounds for private equity owners of troubled and declining companies. So Brendan had to apply that strategic thinking fast and fuel those companies with a strategic direction that would yield positive investor results, which he did more than twofold. So with that, Brendan, I'd like to welcome you to the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome. So let's just start simple. What is strategic thinking?
Okay. I'm glad that you started with strategic thinking versus strategy. And people really like to talk about strategy more. Mm-hmm. And I think strategy really starts with the foundation of establishing the ability to strategically think.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is, not everybody, especially early in your career, gets a chance to participate in strategy, but every single one of us can be a strategic thinker. You don't even have to have a job. You can be in school and be a strategic thinker. Where am I going to go to college? If you're in high school or college, what am I going to do after? So I really like focusing on the foundation first of what is strategic thinking. And strategic thinking is very simple. It's really the mental process that you go through, in your head and write it down on paper and such, to focus yourself as an individual, to focus yourself as a team leader. If you're a team leader, manager, director, vice president, senior vice president, or if you're leading an entire organization, to see the future. We get caught up in our day-to-day every day, and oftentimes we don't really look out to the future. Mm-hmm. And strategic thinking is really putting some of that mental time aside to think about our futures as individuals, teams, and as an overall organization.
Sure. So what are some of the reasons why it's important? Why is it?
Yeah, it's when I think of strategic thinking, and you just think of your daily job. Mm-hmm. You're getting hit with email all day. You're getting hit with requests all day from employees, from leaders, from supervisors, and you don't get a chance to do a lot of the things that are going to propel you forward. Mm-hmm. And what strategic thinking allows you to do is take some time out, and it really lets you think about, as an individual, where do I need to grow? Mm-hmm. What are some skills I need to develop? How am I going to develop those skills? Mm-hmm. Maybe put some time aside to develop those skills. Mm-hmm. It also lets you sit back and say, am I doing the right things? Am I focused on the big picture, or am I so focused on the tactics that I can't see the big picture? And this is something that happens to a lot of folks. A few other key things are we all have goals. Some people write them down, some people they're in their head, but we all generally have goals. It's really important from time to time to stand back and say, how am I doing against those goals? Let's say you're doing certain things that are propelling you. You should be asking yourself, should I be spending more time doing those activities? And we all do activities that don't help us get towards our goals. Should I be doing less of those? Should I be doing that at all? So goal achievement is something, again, virtually every person wants, but taking some strategic time lets you focus on, am I doing the right things? Now, a few others, what if you're not doing the right things and you need to think differently? Or what if you are doing the right things and you want to implement some of those changes? Really taking the time to allow yourself to think differently, putting some time aside, maybe doing it in a different location or such, and also thinking about what are some new opportunities. I know as a leader in the companies I was in, oftentimes they were troubled companies. I would love when somebody would come through my door with an idea, with a new opportunity of how we could realign the company, how we could better the company. But it took those individuals time to think about those, and I think that's that strategic thinking. In the last, we all have to make decisions in life. As individuals, as team members, as leaders, don't do that between two meetings, 2 and 2:30. Don't just kind of cram those decisions in. Sometimes you need to, on the tactical side, but if you've got a strategic decision, put some time aside and really think through so you make a clear, good, well thought out decision.
So one concept I've heard you use before is working on versus in your business. So I think that might be helpful for some folks today to be able to understand.
Yeah. We have had a chance to work together, and you hear me say it all the time. As I mentioned, I spent 12 years doing corporate turnarounds. And, oftentimes the companies weren't thinking strategically. They didn't have the best strategic plans, if plans at all. And before you could just go implement a strategic plan in a company, you really have to start at that foundation and kind of teach the company how to become more strategic, how to think strategically. If you get 10,000 people in a company, it's not 5 people thinking strategically that's going to move it forward. It's 10,000 people all doing their job a little bit differently that's going to get you there. So I really came up with this concept of working in your business. This is the day-to-day. You have reports, you've got to answer to a manager, you've got customers calling you. You've got people asking you for things, you manage employees, it's all that. It's the stuff you get emails. Right, just during this webinar, how many emails do you get? 10, 15 emails?
Probably.
Okay.
To 5 different accounts.
Okay. Managing those and replying to those, and people are asking you for support, that's in your business. On your business is putting some time aside to say, have I got a strategic plan for my department, for my team? What am I doing if I'm in sales? Have I got an account plan? I've been growing this account from 50,000 to 100,000, 150. Is it just happening, or have I really thought about it? Have I thought strategically about, is a competitor coming in? It's looking at our relationships. What I often find interesting is, people have relationships that are very important to them as individuals, as team members, as salespeople, as business leaders. And sometimes our closest relationships, we don't spend a lot of time with. Not that we take them for granted. Some people may, but I don't think that's the case. I think we just get used to those. It's like, am I investing in those relationships? And these are the types of things you can do when working on your business. And it's tough to do, because I guarantee you, when you get back to your desk and you've got your 15 or 20 emails on 5 different accounts, not one of them is going to say, hey, Amanda, how's your strategic plan doing? Hey, Amanda, why don't you take 30 minutes this afternoon and think about your relationship plan? You don't get emails for those. And probably, and we're going to talk about this, you don't have time queued up this afternoon to do those activities. You probably have a couple of calls you got after this. You've probably got a client queued up. You've probably got some follow-up from the webinar. But again, we'll talk about how you put some time aside for that.
So for those people who may find themselves in their inbox or on calls, and they do want to think more strategically, what are some keys for them that will help them?
Yeah, there's a handful of keys that I've found. And again, I've always viewed this as the foundation to strategic planning. Had a little trouble with that one. The first is you got to strike a balance. Now, you can't say, boy, this strategic thinking sounds great, I'm not going to reply to those emails when I get back to my desk. I'm going to focus on all the big stuff, okay? Because that's not going to make you successful. But striking a balance, and we'll talk about that balance. What does that balance look like? 90-10. If you can spend 90% of your time focused in your business, put 10% of your time, and we're gonna actually get down to some raw numbers today. I'm gonna have you fill out a form. Actually, we're gonna get down to spend 10% of your available hours on strategic thinking. And by the way, that will make your 90% more productive. Because what a lot of people think is, but if I put 10% of time aside, let's say 4 hours this week, what am I going to get my job done? Well, if you're doing it strategically and thinking, how can you do your job better? Are you even doing the right tasks? Oftentimes in some of these sessions, when you spend quality time, you might realize, why am I even doing something? You might have just got 2 hours back because you're working on the wrong things. The other is scheduling. Like I said, it's never going to show up on your calendar. Most bosses aren't going to come to you and say, hey, why don't you take Friday afternoon off and go work in a coffee house and go focus on some strategic thinking. Maybe you're lucky enough to have one of those bosses. That is a little inside joke. We do put time aside here at velocityHUB. And the next is win that daily challenge. Because if you are convinced and you put some time aside, that day you're sitting there, you're going to have emails and texts and customers and leaders and employees coming at you. How do you just win that daily challenge and say no? And I'm going to tell you, be a little selfish. Be a little selfish and say, this is me time. This is my time to think strategically. And last is manufacture time. Can one day a week, one day every other week, can you get in an hour early? Can you for an hour during the day, sneak off to another floor of your building, to a quiet space somewhere else, and get an hour or two in for yourself? But you've got to figure out how to manufacture time, because again, it just doesn't naturally just sit there for you to take.
Yeah. So tell us about the time commitment. How many hours?
Like I said, it's 10% of your time. So I'm going to walk you through a little formula. We're going to start with 40 hours a week and 52 weeks a year. So that brings us to 2080. Now you're probably no different than a lot of people out there that are saying, hey, Brent, hold on here. I'm a hard worker. I work 50 hours a week. I work 55. Just to let you know, in the U.S. alone, the average worker is 47 and a half hours. But we're going to keep this pretty simple math and say 80 hours a year. Do you take vacations?
Yeah.
Where do you go? We'll get back to that later. I think we're going to talk about vacations, not to put you on the spot there. But you take about 3 weeks vacation typically in a year, 120 hours. And sometimes those are staycations. And you also take holidays, about 10 a year. And then you've got administrative time. Administrative time is you have a team meeting weekly. Once a month you have a group meeting. You've got to just do some expense reports, just administrative time. So when you take all that out of 2080, you're left with about 1,672 hours. So when we say 10%, break that down. It's 167 hours a year. We're looking at 14 hours a month. That's what I'm asking you if you want to become a strategic thinker and if you really want to increase your performance or your team's performance, but let's focus on your performance, put 14 hours aside every month. Not January, then April, and then July, but 14 hours every month.
Okay, so I think a good way of looking at that is how much time do people spend on their vacations? That might be something we're sharing.
Yeah. And before we hit the vacation, I did want to let you know I got a little template here for you that you can fill out. And for anybody out there, we'll be having this online and you can fill that out. Some people choose to do it daily, weekly, monthly. We kind of put that there. But you asked one of my favorite questions when I do a lot of training around innovation and strategic thinking. I like to ask people, has anyone, any of the participants ever taken a good vacation over the last year? And someone's hand always goes up really quickly, and you start hearing about Turks and Caicos or some really exotic place, and usually you got to cut them off after a couple minutes. But I like to ask them, how many hours did you plan? Did you go on Expedia, Travelocity? Did you use points? And they will go into great detail. And typically, they'll start talking, it's 15 to 20 hours to really put that whole vacation together. Yeah. Some people are a little bit more, some people a little bit less, but that's generally what I hear. And then I ask them, that's great. You spent 20 hours getting ready for your vacation. How many hours did you put into yourself, to your career? How many hours did you sit at your computer early in the morning, late at night, over lunch, close the door and say, hey, I'm going to focus on my career. I'm going to put some strategic time aside. And usually I don't get 15 hours or 20 hours. So I say, well, not just this month. How about this quarter? Well, a couple hours. Well, what about this year? And there's a lot of times I'll get, well, yeah, about 20 hours this year. And then I like to have a little fun with them. I say, hey, how about if you put some more time in the strategic thinking, you increase your performance, you move up the career ladder, maybe you can take even a nicer vacation next year because you got a little bit bigger budget. But it's kind of interesting as people, we spend more time sometimes planning our own vacation than we really do planning our careers or the strategic direction of the team we lead.
So you alluded to us taking strategic time every month as a company. When you go into your strategic thinking time, what are some things that you do?
Yeah, I thought what I tried to do here for you is kind of put together what are some things, what does on your business look like? And I kind of broke it into a few areas. A strategic plan or a marketing plan or a sales plan, depending on what role you're in. And depending on your role, you might have a couple components of that. You might have an operations plan or a financial plan, but what's the plan for your team or yourself that you lead? And then what are some critical processes? So I hear from a lot of people, and I go back to when I was doing turnarounds, and I'd sit down. I did a lot of town halls, and I'd sit down with a team over a breakfast, and I'd say, "What's going on?" They're like, "Oh, our process over here is really screwed up. It's not working well." And I'm like, "Well, how should you do it?" And sometimes they would give me different opinions, and I'd say, "How about if tomorrow the three of you, the four of you, go take an hour, get a whiteboard, use one of our conferences, and really map out what's a better way to do it." And time after time, they would come back literally after an hour or two of strategic thinking time with a process that would knock out 2 or 3 steps. And I'd joke with them and I'd say, "So how long have you been doing it the way you were doing it?" And they're like, "Oh, we've been doing it that way for years." And I'd say, "Just a couple hours and you were able to take out a couple of steps." One of my favorite stories is I was at a company. We were losing a couple $1 million a month, so cash is very important to us. And our day sales outstanding, DSOs, which are when we sent an invoice out, when did we get the money back, was 55 days. And I said to our accounting team, I said, every day that if we go from 55 to 54, one day, that's $1 million cash. Okay? And we're losing $3 million a month. So if you could take it 3 days down, you could keep us in business for 1 more month. Wouldn't that be great? I'm going to tell you, they got it down to 42 days. Part of it was what I needed to do with my job, I needed to think strategically and what does a day mean to them? Because if I just said to the accounting team, do your job better, it's not motivating. But when I could say, if you do your job better, it's $1 million to the company. That motivated them. And then they literally would get together. They would do it every Monday, and they put together a plan for how they did it. So that's that critical processes.
And I'll chime in on that because you've talked about that story before. And I think one thing that not only did you drive home numbers for that side of the organization, but you also worked with your call center and said, these are the number of calls we need to make now in order to, and you got to see how your strategic thinking impacted the whole organization.
Well, most people know how to do their job a little bit better, but they just don't take the time to actually map it out. Maybe go see their manager and say, "Can I change how I do my job?" And and we're a little off topic here, but a lot of people think, "I'm not sure my manager wants to hear that." Try. I know most managers, at least the ones that we try to work with, are, be open to change. Let people come to you. I know that if most managers, if somebody comes to them with a better way to do the job, more efficiently and effectively, which is going to result in less expense or higher customer satisfaction, whatever it is, they're going to say yes to that. So, if you're out there and you don't think that that's compelling to your manager, I'd say give them a shot. But kind of staying on your business. The next is kind of honing in on yourself. As individuals, we all have brands. I have a brand. When you were giving my bio, that's a little bit of the brand that I've built up over the last 25 years. And how you dress, how you speak, how people perceive you, what networking groups you're in. Those are all things that go into your brand. Your social media, what I put on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, that's all my brand. So, and those aren't things those are things that happen, maybe consciously, maybe semi-consciously, for some people, unconsciously. And thinking about your brand and where you want to get to in your career, that's a really good topic to kind of spend some quality time on. And there's some resources online where you can look up developing your professional brand. But it's really important if you have aspirations to progress throughout your career, is building your brand where it's one that people want to invest in and they want to see you lead a bigger part of their organization. Some others are networking. I mentioned that earlier. There's obviously a lot of online networking going on now, whether it be LinkedIn or different social media channels. But there's old school networking, just getting out, industry days, getting out and focusing in your community, your local chamber of commerce, doing some community service work, and establishing some partnerships with some like-minded people. And then the other area, kind of staying on you as a person, is what development do you need? I'm yet to meet a person that's a high performer at any point in my career that wasn't focused on making themselves better. And just to be clear, I've met a lot of people in my career that were happy where they were. They didn't think they needed to develop any leadership skills. They were all set on their professional development. But you know what? They weren't a high performer. When I work with high performers and high performers I've been around, they are constantly looking for ways to get better. And one of my favorite examples, and we just weren't going to go an hour without bringing the Patriots in, is Tom Brady. He's 39 and he's looking for how do I get better. And over the last couple of years, his real focus has been off the field in recovery. He for years it was about how he did strength training and how he did nutrition and how he could ever eat what he eats is amazing. And I'm glad for him, and I'm glad we drafted him in the 6th round. But now he's on to recovery, because as he's getting older, he's saying, as I get older and I get hit and I get injured, I've got to recover faster. But there's a person who's going in the Hall of Fame. Best quarterback ever. He's the GOAT, right? And I think most people would agree, enlightened people, just having a little fun for our non-Patriot fans out there. But think of it, here's a person going in the Hall of Fame, and he's focused on what can he do to get better. That's that example of high performers are constantly focused on how they can get better. And then the last area is, what do you do outside of just your job as a leader or as a team member, and you take care of yourself, and then getting into the community relations. What are you doing in the community? And I find giving back, whether it be through charity, whether it be through various community groups, is very cathartic, but it's also very good for you as a person and leader. And then what about some new relationships that you've got to invest in? Again, if it's important to invest in the existing relationship, but we've constantly got to be kind of calling that in building new relationships. And then what personal development do you need? I'm not going to go into it. It's not the purpose of today's webinar, but I like to tell people that you need to be healthy inside the office and outside the office. So how is your physical health? If your physical health isn't good outside of the office, that affects inside the office. How are your relationships with your family and friends? Those are really important. And I'm going to touch on another one that a lot of people don't like to talk about out loud, and that's financial health. If you're having trouble paying your mortgage, or you're worried about your kids going off to college, and that's a big worry today when you look at the expenses, that can really kind of hurt your day-to-day performance in your job. So these are real things that you've got to address, but no one's going to send you that email taking care of your financial health. No one's going to send you an email and put you on a treadmill. That's up to you, and sometimes you need to put that time aside.
Yeah. So when you do put that time aside, what do you do in your strategic thinking time? So we talked about a lot of things that people can do, but I'd like to hear what you do.
Yeah, in kind of bringing this to the 4 companies that I've worked on turning around, I'd always get asked by people that were really excited. They'd say, "I'm in. I'm going to think more strategically. I'm going to put my foot outside," and then they would say, "What do I do?" And I always thought that was the great question, because it said how they were bought in. The first recommendation by far, and this is the most important one, actually put it on your calendar. If you say, "I'm going to get to it this week," I'm going to bet that come Friday when you're heading out to happy hour or home or wherever, or sitting in traffic, if you've got to commute, you're going to say, "I didn't get to it this week. I'm going to get to it next week." So first of all, go put it on the calendar. I know what I personally do, and people that work for me, what I have them do is 1 day a month. We actually do it the first Friday of every month. We put that whole day aside. Now, by the way, that's ideal. Last Friday, I had a whole day off. I wound up having to work with a client for a couple hours in the afternoon. That's fine. That's life. That's real life. But I got a good 6 hours in that day. So first, schedule it. Second is find a location where you can get into a really good mindset. So that's probably not in your office. That if you're in a bigger office, it might be on a different floor. I've got a client that they've got some working offices, and it's really interesting. You'll see somebody that is on the 6th floor. They're buried themselves in the 2nd floor in a corner because they know no one's going to bother them there. Other people, I mean, this is you think of Starbucks and their coffee. Hey, they're as much a social setting, or the Paneras of the world, and your local coffee shops. Get out there.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do really well by staying home for a morning and getting that done. If you've got younger kids, that might be a little bit of a challenge, but we can all find a location that allows us to get into a little bit of a different mindset. The other thing is, in between, when you get strategic time, keep a list of what do you want to work on. So you've put Friday aside. You're at your coffee place, and I think you go to a local coffee place. We don't want to get there at 8 and say, okay, what do I do now? Mm-hmm. So you kind of want to have a list. You want to say, okay, I've been queuing some things up that I just know I never get to touch, and actually create a little list. I've got an ongoing list all the time, and quite frankly, it's more than 14 hours a month. But I'm like no different. I have to win that daily challenge. And the other thing, and you've seen me do it, and I think from time to time you've made fun of me for it, in a jovial, in a collegial way, is clear away all the tactical. Mm-hmm. So when I say Amanda makes fun of me a little bit, if we've got a strategic day, we call them flow days on a Friday. Thursday, I'm cleaning my office. I'm getting all my email done. I'm probably killing my team with email responses. And I'm literally clearing anything that could be a disruption for that next morning away so that I can really, really, really focus. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I recommend to people is do something before that gets you in the right state of mind. For myself, just some physical stimulation, just going out for a run. If you're somebody that wants to quiet down and read a book, but is there any way that you can kind of get into your Zen-like state or your quiet state where you can really think? And I know for me, it's always been kind of, get out and get a little workout in. And then the last one, and it's such an obvious one, it's the most obvious one I can tell you, but it's the one that people do the least, is turn your phone off, shut your email off. You know what? If let's say you take a Friday from 8 to 12, the world's not going to end if you're not on email to 12:05. And if you're in a role where you just can't do it for 4 hours, maybe just check it at 10 and go till 12:30 and give yourself 30 minutes. But turn your phone off. Don't be distracted, because it's not. And you might just say, "But I just responded to an email." It's not just responding to an email. Your mind might have completely left what you were thinking on, and it might be a 30-minute distraction to kind of get back into that flow state, back into that strategic mindset.
So we had our flow day recently, and a few outputs that I saw from that, and a few pieces of feedback. The first was I use a stand-up desk sometimes in my regular office. I find that's really helpful for me. But when I was in my strategic flow time, I really needed to be comfortable. And so I had to find somewhere that I was really comfortable, because we were basically kicked out of the office for a day for a good reason. Then I worked on a relationship plan because I found that was something that would be really helpful for me. And then the last output that's come from strategic thinking time, just with it being something that's very important here, is whenever I write a to-do list, up at the top, I write down the big strategic goal that I'm looking to achieve. So it could really be anything, but it's more based on a long-term goal. And then as I'm writing my individual actions, I can tie it back to that goal so that it works hand in hand. There's the balance so that I'm not doing too many things that are outside of my...
I was going to say, no, what do you do when you have some actions that don't tie to any of your goals?
I move them to the bottom.
Yeah, good job. No, because and by the way, we all wind up with actions, and that's why I asked the question kind of in a funny manner, but serious. And we all wind up just putting stuff on our to-do list that, at the end of the day, don't get us to our goals. Mm-hmm. And those are little time thieves. And that's how you should look at those actions, as they're just stealing your time, which is precious. You can't get it back. You can always make more money. You can get another promotion. You can do things, but you can't get time back. But those little time thieves, you want to be careful of those.
So when you do your strategic thinking time, what are some of the outputs that you've seen?
Yeah, it really depends on what's going on. When I look at my turnaround time, that where I spent 12 years, well, first usually it would be just to have some sane moments. I'd go into a company that was losing a lot of money, and we had a very short period of time to turn it around. Oftentimes I'd be inundated with a lot of employees that really wanted to help, but I also had to manage my time. So sometimes it was just literally to get away from everybody. And I say that very affectionately.
Yeah.
I consider myself an employee-friendly leader, but sometimes you just need to be left alone. So the first thing I'd say is it would allow me time to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing it would allow me to do is really sit back and assess strategically what are our biggest challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I usually have a blueprint. I had a strategic planning methodology that I like to use, and it allowed me to kind of stand back and say, how are we really going to implement this?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes I would see trends. 20, 30, 40 people would see me during the course of the week, and I wouldn't realize that 5 or 6 of the people were telling me the same thing, because they were telling me different days, different times. I was doing my best to retain it all, but you're in a pretty hyper-paced environment. Sometimes taking those quiet moments to say, 5 people have told me we've got a problem with this client. I really got to look into that, and I was able to look into it in a proactive manner as opposed to more of a reactive manner. Running a smaller business, it's very different. In a smaller business, it's more about how do I move the business forward this week, this month? Am I giving all the support to my team members that they need? And it's also getting the energy back from them when they come back from their strategic time as well.
So you actually just hit on that, and this is a perfect segue into strategic planning. So the result of your strategic thinking time for individuals and teams, organizations, leaders that may not have a strategic plan or would like to refine theirs. Can you share with us what a strategic plan is and what that even means?
Yeah, it's interesting. Most people intellectually understand what a strategic plan is. Most people can articulate what a strategic plan is. But then when you ask them, tell me about how you're implementing the plan, you get a quite different answer. So a strategic plan is very simple. It starts with a document. Hopefully it doesn't have dust on it from the top shelf. But it's really setting the direction for an organization to achieve its goals. And in that direction, you'll say, over the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, however many you define it. We tend to define them in 3 years. Oftentimes, in a lot of the industries we work in, it's tougher to define where do you want to be in 5 years. It allows you to set those goals based on your strategic direction, but it also lets the employees engage in what are those goals, what's the strategic direction. It also serves your clients. So, are we focused on the right clients? You might be, I'm on the board of a company, and we were just talking about it, where we're asking, are we going after the right clients? Initially we think, let's go after bigger clients, right? Bigger's better. But what if we don't have the right technology to go after the bigger clients? We might just lose a lot more. If you go upstream, as I like to call it, you might go from being very competitive in the mid-markets to being uncompetitive, or things that you compete on customer service in the mid-markets, and at the top of the market, you might have to have a better technology system. If that's the case, you may be wasting some time. So it's really serving your clients, serving your employees. And the last is, unless you're in a nonprofit, one of the goals of any business is to return a fair profit. And I say fair, and that's up for the shareholders to determine. If you're publicly traded, your shareholders are your stock price. And when they think it's fair, your stock goes up. When they don't think it's fair, your stock goes down. You may work in a company that's owned by private equity, venture capital, angel investors. You may be in a family-owned business. You may be in a founder-led business, and they define fair. So strategic planning is really putting that plan together that's setting the vision of the organization for the next 3 years and the goals for the employees, customers, and the owners.
So for these people that are building plans, where do they start?
It's interesting to ask that question, because I kind of answer it with a question. In that strategy is very simple to understand. It's very simple to do. It's very hard to get a group of people to do it. Why? Because we're busy. Kind of the whole first half of this webinar. So it really starts with what's your intent and vision, and I've kind of outlined 9 questions. Who are you as a company, as an organization? What are your goals and priorities? You talk about clients you serve, products and services. How are you organized? And sometimes we don't realize, over time, we have to change how we're organized based on the maturity we are in a given industry or as we grow. How do we approach our growth? Are we going after sales directly, indirectly? Are we going to look at acquisitions? Also looking at what resources do we need? And then the last question is, what actions do we need to take on a day-to-day basis to achieve our goals? So I like to say, it's not rocket science, but it's pretty straightforward. It's a series of 9 questions you've got to ask yourself.
So I know in some of your turnarounds with companies you've led, you've had to build plans before. Can
Correct.
you share with me a little bit about
Yeah.
those experiences?
Some of the companies that I've worked for, we've taken money from strategic investors such as Cisco and Dell and Genuity and the old Gateway computers. Some people may remember those as the ones that looked like cows, as well as major investment banks and stuff. The first thing they always wanted to do is know, where were you going?
Mm-hmm.
So the second thing they want to know is, what are you going to become? So if you're a $100 million company, $500 million company, or $5 million company, they want to know, if you're $100 million, are you going to be $200 million? Because if you're going to go from 100 to 105 to 110, their appetite for investment might not be that big. If you're going to go from 100 to 200, they're probably going to get pretty interested. So they kind of want to know, how are you going to get there? And these are just a few examples of companies that have invested, that in totality invested a little under $1 billion, $987 million, but we were able to give them $2.2 billion back. Now, when you implement successful strategies, what comes out of that? First of all, it focuses your resources.
Mm-hmm.
You get really focused on, what do you need to do, and those to-do lists that don't roll up to your goals, you stop doing those things. It also engages employees. Depending on what study you read, and it's study after study, so this isn't just one consulting company doing this. Somewhere between 40 and 50% of workers in the U.S. are actively disengaged in their job or disengaged. What that kind of says is, some of them are coming in not wanting to come in, and some are just coming in just to do their job. As leaders, it's our job to make the job interesting and to engage them so that they can do more, be more productive. One of the ways you do that is you tie it to a strategic plan where you've got a vision, you've got a set of values, and you let people know. That example that I used with the accounting team, if you do your job really well, you can save the company $1 million, and they save us more than $1 million without being able to tie that. So you really want to engage your employees. And most companies, I say most, some companies not as much, you want to grow. You want to grow the company. Well, to grow, unless you're just in an industry where it's just rising, you've got to have a plan for how you're going to grow. Mm-hmm. How much do you invest in marketing? How much do you invest in sales? If you do grow, can you service it? Do you have the products? Do you have the service team? And a few other areas are, it helps you make decisions. One thing I always talk about in strategic plan is the constituent prism. Every decision you make is a trade-off between employees, shareholders, and clients. So if you make a decision to give a 3% raise across the board to everybody, then you just made a decision. You either need to raise prices to your customers, and it affects them. If you're not going to raise prices, or the market just won't demand it, you might return less profit to your owners. So every decision you make has to go through that prism, and a good strategy, a good strategic direction really looks through that prism as you make decisions. And the last is, it really gives everybody in the organization a common language and a common direction and platform to really launch from.
Yeah, and I've seen that too, just with some of the organizations we work with strategy. Once they're aligned, then everyone feels like they're moving towards something instead of all over the place. So when strategies are successful, we talked about that, but what happens if they fail?
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of strategies do fail. It's really important, before you say, oh, that strategy failed, to really look at why. Mm-hmm. And the first reason, there's 5 or 6 different reasons, is lack of competency. A lot of people haven't put a strategic plan together. They don't know how to put a strategic plan together. Mm-hmm. So having somebody on the team that knows how, or bringing somebody in that can help you develop it, very, very important. I remember early in my career, I was very fortunate to get on a strategic planning team. I got on it with a gentleman. His name was Joe. He was from a large consulting company, and I was just a sponge. I was trying to take everything in that I could, because I said, if I want to be a CEO someday, if I want to be a bigger leader, I'm going to have to be the one leading some of these. So I'm going to take everything I can from Joe and implement that later in my career. So first is lack of competency. No one on the team knowing how to do it. The second one, and this is an unfortunate one, because competency, you can get competency. This one's kind of unfortunate, is passive aggressive. So you got 10 people in the room, You make a decision. We're going to look for an acquisition of a company that can help us here. We're going to do an acquisition in Asia because we want to add that. Everybody says yes. And 15 minutes later, someone's taking the elevator back to their office and they're like, that's a dumb idea. But they didn't have the courage. And I intentionally picked the word courage because that's what I have to say to people that have that passive aggressive. It's like, speak up.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in the room, you got invited into the room for a reason. Participate. Don't spectate. But passive aggressive behavior when building a strategic plan can kill a plan because that person gets on the elevator and says we shouldn't do this. They don't keep that to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Even when they think they kept it to themselves, their body language, what they say, that department kind of shuts down a little bit. Another one is unclear ownership. Who owns it? Do you own it? Do I own it? Do you own it? And really having a good plan with owners, action, due dates, statuses is important. And
empowering.
It's empowering. And the more empowering thing, even more, is when you communicate it. And there's an approach that we recommend called cascading. It goes from the leadership team, then to whatever the next level is. Let's call it the managers, and then from the managers to your employees. But you want to cascade it so all parts of the organization understand it. Now that might be 3 different slide decks. The slide deck for the leadership team, it might be 50 pages and include a lot of fancy financials.
Mm-hmm.
You take that to your managers in the field, you might dial that back. It may be a 15, 20 page deck. It's got some metrics, some financial metrics. Well, then you're going out to 1,000 employees, 10,000 employees, 100 employees. You might say, you know what? We've got to simplify this a little bit because we want to make it real for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you got to think that. A couple obvious ones are just weak follow through. You don't have a project plan because you don't have anybody owning it. No one's really owning it. And I kind of put it as a catch-all, is fear. Some people are afraid. Well, if we build a strategic plan and we have an action plan, we're actually going to have to do what we said we're going to do, and that leads to a fear of failure. And I will say something on failure with plans. If you build your strategic plan and you don't have any failures in it, it wasn't a good strategic plan. You didn't push your organization to great heights. I would say, I'm not telling you to go build a plan and fail, but you've got to try new things. And we could just name a dozen companies. Think of Kodak. At one point in time, in 1995, Kodak was the #1 brand in the world. Had a better brand recognition than Coca-Cola. And where's that brand today? At some point, they were afraid to continue to push the envelope, and we now have Instagram now making memories online. So just fear. Fear can be paralyzing to organizations.
One thing I'll add too is that for a lot of folks that build strategic plans, they build these fancy plans and then they go and put them on a shelf and then they get dusty and they're not actionable. And I think having the vision and strategic thinking, but also tying the actions back to that are so important to make sure that it's a living, breathing document, not something that sits on a shelf.
And that's why I started on strategic thinking. If you build a strategic plan and your organization has no strategic thinking capability, then they don't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. But if you build strategic thinking in your organization and then deliver a plan, your lowest level employee now can understand, wait, I can do more, and they can apply their strategic thinking skills. But if it's done by 5 people in a back room or worse, if you hand it to a consulting company to do for you, which you shouldn't do, maybe hire a consulting company to help you facilitate it, but don't let them do it for you. And if it's 5 people doing it in a back room and then doing the big reveal, the big ta-da at your annual kickoff, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. People have got to be engaged. People have got to be engaged.
So talk to me about the structure. What is a model? What's the best model to use? What are
this is thing I'll tell you. A lot of CEOs, COOs, CFOs, whatever C you want to use, get hung up on, and I've got a pretty strong opinion on it. I don't care what model you use. I don't care if it's some big consulting companies. I don't care if it's one you found on the internet. What model you use doesn't matter. What matters is whatever model you use, are you executing it? So if you had the best model, one that was worth $1 million just to license the IP, and you didn't execute it, that wouldn't be worth nearly as much as if you had a average or below average model that you executed. So you see here, I just model whatever one. Now, in my career, I had developed a model because as I went from company to company, I wanted to be able to replicate that success. And I just call it our ICE methodology, which is what's the intent of the organization, your vision, your values, your goals, and your core capabilities. These are the things you leverage long term. Then setting a course of action, which are what markets are you going to serve, what are you offering, what products and services, what's your model, and what resources do you need. And then probably the most important part is the execute, your actions, which go back to your goals.
So looking at this model, what are some things that leaders and business owners can start doing now to build a strategic plan?
Yep. There's a number of things. If you're going to build a strategic plan, so if you're tuning in today and you're saying, okay, it's March, we really want to kick it off. And by the way, you're still in Q1. You can get it kicked off. Is first, have an executive sponsor. Somebody that owns it for the company. That doesn't mean they own all the work. That means that you've got one clear owner, have an executive sponsor. The next is whatever team you put around the table, 2 people, 10 people, 20 people. And it's one thing I used to do is have everyone sign a commitment card that I'm going to commit to developing the strategic plan with an open mind. And, by the way, you can hit the passive aggressive thing in that little commitment card that you're not going to get any of that. Set a specific timeline. If you're kicking it off in March, say on April 18th, we're going to have it done. Because these things, again, there's no time on the calendar that says, oh, I got 6 hours open to go do some analysis. Ensure you have access to information. So this won't work if your IT department or technology or your customer service metrics, or if you have Salesforce.com or if you CFO, if you don't have access to information because you need information to help make some decisions, set that strategic thinking time aside. Because if you're leading a part of it and you've got your strategy meeting set, you're gonna have to do work in between. And by the way, that this isn't like high school English class where you're trying to read the book the night before. That's not going to be the best job. Have an open mindset, and have an open mindset because if you're doing a good job of a plan, there's going to be things you stop doing. There's going to be things that you aren't doing that you start doing, and you've got to be willing to change. And I know in my career, there's people that are very politely and professionally disinvited to work on the strategic plan because they weren't willing to change. And if they weren't willing to change, I wasn't going to let that stifle the team. Now, there were also people that weren't supposed to be on the leadership team that I would bring in because they were catalysts, and they were really good thinkers, and they were people that had great ideas. And I said, you don't have to be on the leadership team to help with the plan, and bring them in. And then the last is make sure that the executive sponsors in your work streams, or wherever you call them, are assigning out the tactical execution for the plan.
Sure. Okay. So some of the companies that you've worked with, the majority of them, you've built a strategic plan. So what were some of the results of those strategic plans?
Yep. One of the, one company when I went in and I had met with the private equity firm, and I was going in, it was a sales problem. The company hadn't grown in a couple of years, and it was sales, and they liked that I had a sales background, so they say, just go fix sales. And I always get nervous when someone's already got the issue figured out, because I find more times than not, that's not the issue. So using this company as a backdrop, when I got in and really kind of went around and started to put the strategic planning process together, what I saw is the company had so many products and services, and keep in mind, it was a turnaround, so it was losing money, that they had all become outdated. Almost all the products become outdated. And they had so many that the salespeople were just trying to sell anything. They didn't have a sales strategy. Strategy was, could we get our customers to sell anything? And because they couldn't continue to invest in a broad spectrum of products, they almost weren't investing in anything. So every day they were getting, really, when you think of it, in worse shape. They were getting more outdated, and the salespeople were just trying to sell anything. So what we did in that situation is we really decided, what did we want to be as a company? And we put a focus on that. And then we divested about 1/3 of our products and services and said, these aren't ones that are going to be going forward. We don't have a lot of capital. We don't have a lot of cash. We can't invest in everything. It's kind of the socialism concept. If you invest in everything, you invest in nothing. So we divested. That raised some capital, reinvested in our core assets. We also then were able to do a small acquisition in our target strategic market that we wanted to go after, which accelerated and helped our brand. And now our salespeople, the salespeople were the problem, remember. all of a sudden, we gave them real tools, we gave them products, and we gave them a focused suite of services to sell to particular people in an organization. They started performing.
Mhm.
But it was very hard to let parts of the business go. It was very hard. Matter of fact, I got a lot of resistance from the company. They're like, hey, we've had that product line for 20 years, and guess what? 10 years ago, it was the hallmark. That was 10 years ago. We got to focus on where are we going in the future. Also, when we had that many products, our expense structure was out of line for the size revenue we were. So just an example of, got told it was a sales problem, and in reality, it really was, there was a product mix issue.
Mhm.
But again, the salespeople weren't performing. So that was just an example just from one of the turnarounds.
I like that example too, because it shows how you came in and were that strategic thinker in that moment. You had people that were kind of caught up in what was going on and what they thought was true or the cause, but you sat back and said, is there something bigger going on? Is there these are just the symptoms and there's another effect somewhere. So that's really helpful. Thank you. You were going to give another example too.
Another example is a recent one of our clients here at velocityHUB. We started working with the CEO, and it was a family-owned business turned over to the son, and the son really wanted to take it to the next level. We hear that a lot. Would like to take our business to the next level, and we worked with him on building a strategic plan. We worked with him and his management team and his leadership team, and this is a picture we did an offsite. And as you can tell, these are manly men here in this picture, and these were guys that knew the business and had been in the business for 30 years. And we had to do a little change management and kind of show like, hey, we want to go in a new direction. We're not dismissing what you know.
Mhm.
We're very proud of what you know. We just want to all get in alignment and move in the same direction. And I'll tell you, at the end of this offsite, it was very compelling to see how far this team had come along, how far they had bought into the future of the company. Matter of fact, their only complaint the next week was, we don't want to wait 2 weeks to roll it out to the rest of the company. They wanted to roll it out the next week. We have to explain to them, you want to roll out your communication plan very effectively and consciously. You don't want to roll it out too quickly. But I took that the next week as, wow, what a compliment that they're so bought in now. They want the rest of the organization. Another thing they did is they built a leadership academy on the back end to do some ongoing training for areas that they determined they had skill gaps in moving forward.
And I know they've weaved some strategic initiatives through that leadership academy.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think we're at about 10 more minutes left. So as we're wrapping up here now, I wanted to hit on something that is really powerful for me. So when I first came in over almost 4 years ago now, we started working together, one of the first things I saw on the wall was this quote, have the courage to fail and the faith to succeed. And I know that going into some of those turnarounds that you did, you talked about strategies that you had to have little failures along the way to know you were pushing yourself. So tell me a little bit about what that quote means to you and tie it to strategy for me.
Yeah, it's actually been kind of my career quote going back 20 years, and it's really become more of a life quote for me. And I've always viewed that I enjoyed solving problems. I started as an engineer, and I wound up getting kind of pushed over to account management when they said, Bernie, you like sitting down with clients and solving problems. And I'm still not convinced that they didn't push me over there because I wasn't as good at the engineering side, but I'm okay with it. But what I saw is a lot of people and a lot of organizations didn't always do what was possible because they were so concerned about failing and just getting raised in a simple way in New Hampshire by great parents. They'd always raised me to kind of have courage, and they said it's okay to fail. And not to get on a social topic, but I worry about sometimes the way we're raising our generation now, where we're almost letting our kids be afraid of failing. Like you can't get anything less than an A. You've got to be on the A team. You've got to make the AAU basketball team, but kind of getting raised where it's okay to fail. And I know that oftentimes you learn more from some of your failures than successes, but just know that it's okay to fail, but have faith that you're going to make that A team. Have faith that the business is going to turn around. Have faith that when you met with that accounting team, that they heard you, that they listened, and that they were going to go find a way to take 3 days off the day sales outstanding and save you $1 million. And what I can tell you is I've had lots of success, had lots of failures, but what I haven't had is lack of courage. And I think that's something that if I can just pass that on to people, is have courage and do whatever is possible for yourself, for your team, for your organization, for yourself, and for your family.
Good. Thank you. So I'm going to look over to our team here. Do we have any comments or questions that we'll add in? All right, I have one more question here. So it's still Q1 2017 for folks that are interested in strategic thinking and strategic planning. Any final thoughts as they're going?
What I'd say is if you're listening today, I would just ask you to ask yourself, a couple of questions. Do you have a good strategic plan? And when I say good strategic plan, don't get focused on the model.
Mm-hmm.
Is it something that is known throughout the organization, or is it something that's in your office?
Mm-hmm.
Is it well thought out? And if you answer yes, that's fantastic. If you answer yes, ask yourself the next question: does my team have the strategic thinking ability to implement it? And have I created an environment that allows them, that affords them the opportunity to take that time that they need? Now, if you answered no to the strategic plan, what I don't want you to do is say, well, we're coming up on the end of Q1, because that's what you say when it's the beginning of March. You think you're already at the end of Q1. We'll have to do a better job next year. No. Have the courage right now to say, we're late. We missed it by a couple months. And maybe our plan this year isn't going to be as robust as next year, but commit to one by, let's say, tax day, April 15th. And just, again, it's maybe not going to be one that you have 2 or 3 months to put into. Maybe that's next year's, but commit to putting one together. And then secondly, go back to that strategic thinking foundation and embrace that so that your team has the ability to implement it.
Very good. Well, thank you, Brendan. We're right on time here, so that's great. I'll take this back. So our goals for today, I think we hit them. So we were focused on thinking about strategic thinking, keys to being a strategic thinker, building a strategic plan for your business, and then overcoming challenges. And we just hit on courageously pursuing your goals as well. So great program. I think we hit all those today. So then for next time, I'd like to invite everyone to join us on April 26th. We're going to have special guest Chris Licata, who is the CEO of the Technic Group USA. And we're going to be talking about driving growth and leading transformational change. So that's the vision, leaderships, and steps to taking a company from small company to the big leagues. So we'll be back on April 26th. So again, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.